I do encourage people who are sitting in the back to come and fill the table, because they're inevitably latecomers who need to sit there. So if you're already here, you get credit for coming on time. Come and sit at the table.
Actually, as the dean, I could intervene and say that we won't start. It's actually much more considered for the speaker to sit where the speaker can see.
Okay. All right, well, while you're all getting settled, I will proceed with the introduction. I'm Deborah Crone, a faculty member here at the BGC and one of the conveners, together with Andrew Morrill, of the seminar in Renaissance and Early Modern Material Culture. This is the first of two seminars this academic year. The second will be on Tuesday, March 25th, when Alexander Marr of Cambridge University will speak on early modern instrument aesthetics. And I don't know what that's about, honestly. It's now my pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, Femke Speelberg. But as a prologue, I'd like to start with a couple of citations from two plays by Ben Jonson, which give us a frame within which to situate this focus on ornament prints. In the Staple of News from 1625, a foppish man questions his tailor as follows: "I pray thee, tell me, fashioner, what authors thou readest to help thy invention? Italian prints, or Arras hangings? They are tailors' libraries." And now the second quote, also from Ben Jonson, another play called Cynthia's Revels, or The Fountain of Self-Love from 1600. There are two nymphs who are discussing their headgear. And one says to the other, "What, have you changed your head tire?" The other responds, "Yes, faith. The other was so near the common, it had no extraordinary grace. Besides, I had worn it almost a day, in good troth." And then the other responds, "I'll be sworn, this is most excellent for the device, and rare. 'Tis after the Italian print we looked on the other night." So these two examples, little sort of snapshots of the role of prints, in this case specifically Italian prints, in transmitting knowledge for English consumers, in this case specifically information about fashion, shoes and hats in these two examples. But it's also an example of the pervasiveness of print culture across the social spectrum in late Renaissance Europe, so much so that the mention of Italian prints can function as what must have been a joke on the English stage. Now, to us, of course, ornament prints are no joking matter. And I'm going to introduce our speaker with that. Femke Speelberg is assistant curator in the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where she arrived in 2011, and where she concentrates on ornament and architectural drawings, as well as prints and model books. Educated at the Radboud University in Nijmegen, in the Netherlands, she studied art and visual culture, focusing on strapwork ornament at Fontainebleau for her thesis. Before arriving at the Met, she was guest curator of an exhibition on ornament prints from the collection of Nana Ottema, who was an important Dutch collector who died in 1955, that was shown at the Museum Het Valkhof in Nijmegen and at the Groningen Museum in Bruges in 2010. She was also co-author with Peter Furing of a publication about this same collection. In addition to this, she was a contributor to the exhibition Squirvito in 3D at the Museum Boijmans van Beuningen in Rotterdam, and that was about late medieval earthenware in 2009. Among her other publications, some in press, are several articles that address various aspects of the role of drawings and prints in Italian Renaissance art, with titles such as An Unknown Competition Between Michelangelo and Raphael Documented in Prints, and The Origins of Strapwork and Ornament in Relation to the Emancipation of the Ornament Frame, 1450 to 1550. Since arriving at the Met, she's contributed to the exhibition Bernini, Sculpting in Clay in 2012, and Italian Renaissance and Baroque bronze sculpture from the Robert Lehman collection, which is currently on view. She was the curator of Living in Style, 5 Centuries of Interior Design from the collection of drawings and prints that was up over this past summer, and is now at work on Cleopatra's Needle, an in-house exhibition that will open in a week or so, right?
2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, okay. She is also working on a book about the history of ornament prints in early modern Europe, and will speak to us this evening from part of that project. And you can see the title of her talk on the screen. Please join me in welcoming Femke Speelberg.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Andrew, for inviting me. Can anyone hear me? Does everyone hear me? Good? Okay, so we'll begin. If you ask me if I know what an ornament print is, I will respond with a definite yes. If you ask me, I can give you a watertight definition of what the term ornament print constitutes. My answer would be no. As a curator of ornament prints, one would expect to know what they are or what it is meant with the term. But as I discover on a regular basis, the parameters of the group of prints referred to with this title is fluid. The best explanation for this curious fact can be found in the fact that, although ornament prints were produced, used, and collected since the late 15th century, there was no comprehensive name for this type of print until the second half of the 19th century, when historicism sparked a renewed interest in their subject matter as so-called voorlageblätter, which literally translates to model sheets or patterns. During this period, they were therefore avidly collected by museums, academies, and interior decorators as historic records of design. This heightened interest also led to the production of several highly important catalogs, which disclose much information about the history of this genre of prints and their producers. To fully comprehend the history, however, a great amount of self-study is still required, as one has to be able to draw conclusions by cross-referencing the entries, which are often organized either by school, artist, or subject matter. This structure is understandable when thinking of the practical work of a curator or librarian who is trying to create an accessible inventory to a collection, while at the same time providing a good reference tool for private collectors and owners who need help in determining exactly what it is they own or in which areas their collection has significant holes. These pragmatic catalogs do not help, however, to make ornament prints more accessible to those who have not yet been made privy to the rich and colorful world that constitutes the genre. Skeptics might get the impression that there's not much more worth saying about the ornament print, other than who its maker was and where and when it was published. It is also in one of these catalogs that the genre finally received a name, ornament print, or rather the German version, Ornamentstich, which was then quickly adopted in other languages all around the world. A helpful tool when referring to the genre, the name itself is not without its problems. The sting lies in the word ornament, which evokes questions and difficulties on various levels, ranging from the practical to the metaphysical. To begin with the latter, as is highlighted particularly in recent publications about ornament, the question, what is ornament, proves as hard to answer as the age-old question, what is art? And when we think in the line of thought of men such as Gottfried Semper and Alois Rigo, the two questions cannot even be separated out that easily, for the earliest forms of art were nothing more and nothing less than ornament. While this metaphysical approach makes a topic into an immense mass of thoughts, theories, and abstractions, the opposite, very practical association of the word ornament, a predominantly two-dimensional type of surface decoration, limits the scope to far less than what the genre really represents. To give an impression, the term is used for print showing, amongst others, patterns and isolated motifs made up out of leaf decorations, calligraphy, cartouches, garlands, festoons, friezes, frames, cipher monograms, trophies, and strapwork, models for embroidery and lace, gold and silversmith work, furniture such as beds, cabinets, clocks, chairs, tables, staircases, locks and lock plates, etc., as well as religious objects as altars, confessionals, baptismal fonts, pulpits, and choir stalls. And moving away from isolated designs, ornament prints also include architecture and architectural elements presented in their context, such as windows, portals, niches, pillars, capitals, terms, and caryatids. And then there are the exteriors represented by gardens, fountains, gargoyles, pergolas, garden houses, grottos, and pleasure palaces. Another special category is formed by the so-called fete prints, which show designs for ephemeral events, such as ceremonial entries, funerals, fireworks, installations, and the costumes and decors that came along with them. As you can understand, listening to such a list, which is not even complete, the word ornament does not fully cover its meaning. And because of this diversity, writing a comprehensive history of a genre as heterogeneous as the ornament print is not an easy task. But at the same time, it begs for it all the more. At the very least, it couldn't hurt to come to a better understanding of the essential characteristics of the genre as a whole. In the past, various attempts have been made to give a proper descriptor of this type of print, some more satisfactory than others. One of the first catalogues of Renaissance ornament print catalogues to emerge in the last few decades was the catalogue of the Rijksmuseum, which appeared in 1988, and described ornament prints as a print where the picture is used as an example for artisans to use in the same or a different material. Approximately 10 years later, Elizabeth Miller, in her authoritative catalogue of 16th century ornament prints from the Victoria and Albert Museum, nuanced this description by stating, "At the core of ornament print studies lies prints intended neither to illustrate a narrative nor to serve a documentary purpose. Instead, they are images that depict things which are essentially two-dimensional in character, and are either conceived for or suited to the decoration of two-dimensional surface." Although I fully agree with the first part of the explanation, I cannot but hesitate about the second part. The reason for this is that Miller bases her ideas on the explanation given by Peter Furing in the Encyclopedia Universalis in his entry on ornament in general. As I've argued above, however, the word ornament print in itself does not cover all that is covered by the word ornament print. As such, in a 2010 book on the ornament print collection of Nana Ottema, I formulated the following. In a broad sense, ornament prints are prints conceived with the principal function of showing inventions in the field of decoration and design. This distinguishes the ornament print from other genres, which focus on the illustration of narrative, whether it's related to religion, mythology, or profane sources, and those conveying symbolic or allegorical meaning. The latter can be part of the first, or vice versa, but the principal determinant is their first objective. In the following, I'd like to focus on some of the earliest ornament prints and what they can tell us about the genre. While on his journey through the Netherlands in 1521, Albert Dürer presented a series of 6 woodcuts of intricate knotwork designs to his colleague, the Antwerp glass painter Dirk Vellet. He made a note of the transaction in his famous travel diary, simply describing the prints as the 6 knots. Unlike most of his other prints, the designs did not carry his signature consisting of the iconic initials AD to claim them as his invention. And Dürer probably had good reason to do so, for their invention is attributed to no one other than the illustrious Italian artist Leonardo da Vinci. This attribution derives from a set of anonymous Italian engravings of the same knotwork designs, tentatively dated to the late 15th century. Incorporated in the designs is the enigmatic inscription Accademia Leonardo da Vinci, Academy of Leonardo da Vinci, which is found only on one other plate. What type of academy this inscription refers to, or whether it ever actually existed, is still a matter of debate. The association with Leonardo da Vinci is not doubted, however, and there appears no real reason to do so. As my colleague Carmen Bambach has pointed out, it becomes clear from Da Vinci's notebooks, as well as his paintings, that he was fascinated by the intricacies of knotwork, which he referred to as groppi. The knots return as embroidery in the costumes worn by the figures in paintings by Leonardo and the artist in his immediate circle. I hope you can tell the details are somewhat vague on the sleeves and in the borders of the dresses. They are also often, and they are therefore often described as being designs for embroidery. But as Leonardo shows himself in the Sala delle Asse in the Castello Sforzesco in Milan, they could be used in various types of decoration. Leonardo was neither the first nor the only one who was interested in the type of ornament. It can be found in works by various artists active in the late 15th century and early 16th century, including such famous examples as the Disputa by Raphael in the Stanza della Signatura. I show you a detail here. And the beautiful prayer book of Claude of France, wife to Francis I, which is now kept in the Morgan Library here in New York. But the attractive motive, not surprisingly, also found their way to the so-called arti minori, testifying to their general popularity. Leonardo's knots are some of the most intricate examples, however, and it must have been their perfection that intrigued both him and his contemporaries. Giorgio Vasari, who must have seen or even owned at least one of the prints, makes note of them in Leonardo's Vita, describing them as groups of chords arranged with order, which one can follow from beginning to end, forming a tondo, of which one can see a very intricate and very beautiful example in a print. The question whether the idea to spread these designs through prints came from Leonardo himself or someone in his immediate surroundings cannot be answered satisfactorily, and is perhaps also not as relevant for the early history of the ornament print as the coming together of certain key factors. Not only the ingenuity of a great master like Leonardo da Vinci and the general interest in this type of clever ornament, but also the timing and location. For by this time, the art of engraving had established itself well enough in Italy to make the idea of this enterprise seem an obvious one. I would argue that 10 years earlier, this would certainly not have been the case yet. And at the same time, Milan, at the turn of the 15th century, was turning into somewhat of a center for ornament print production, most likely due to the presence of a few gifted engravers, such as Giovanni Pietro Birago and Giovanni Antonio da Brescia, of which the latter has even been mentioned as a possible engraver of Leonardo's knotwork designs. How many copies of the series of knots were printed is unknown. The fact that nowadays only one full set of the print survives in the Ambrosiana in Milan, with only a further handful of single sheets and other collections scattered across Europe, indicates that most likely only a limited number of sets were printed originally. Perhaps that is also the reason why Albrecht Dürer, upon seeing the prints, most likely during his second stay in Italy between 1505 and 1507, and recognizing their ingenuity and appeal, decided to make his own copies, to make them available on the other end of the Alps as well. In doing so, he must have stepped over his own scruples, which he had uttered not long before against Marcantonio Raimondi for making engraved copies after his own inventions. Raimondi had, however, not only copied Dürer's compositions, but also his monogram, meaning that the prints could be mistakenly seen as being works by the hand of the northern artist, something Dürer clearly did not endorse. In copying Leonardo's knotwork designs, therefore, he did exactly the opposite by not claiming authorship himself, but also by not crediting Leonardo for his authorship. Only after Dürer's death in 1528 did someone add the famous monogram to the wood blocks, which were, like many of other Dürer's plates, printed for a long time to come. Now, for me, the case of the knotwork prints is an essential moment in the early history of ornament print. Not only does it appear that both in the cases of the engravings after Leonardo and the woodcuts by Dürer, we are dealing with some of the earliest ornament prints to be conceived not as single-leaf prints, but as a uniform series. At the same time, they embody many aspects that are embedded in the genre of the ornament print, but have often remained underexposed or misunderstood. For one, they highlight the interrelationship between the ornament prints and the many other disciplines of the arts, which, especially in the beginning of the ornament print production, appear to have been very significant, but would remain strong throughout the 4 centuries in which ornament prints were produced. In addition, their creation illustrates that ornament prints were not just a medium for artisans with no imagination of their own and in need of models, but a genre that fascinated and employed some of the most famous and talented artists known today. Perhaps most importantly, to my view, they reveal something of how ornament was perceived by its early modern audience. It was seen as a commodity, not in a sense of something common, but a highly valued collective good that was deserving of attention and was worth distributing as news, hot off the presses. It is this last element that influenced the rapid development of the genre most, because as it so happens, there was a lot of news to be spread. During the second half of the 15th century and the first half of the 16th century, the artistic periods often referred to as the High Renaissance and Manierism, it appears as though all senses were heightened, and artists and patrons strove to stimulate them through works of art when and wherever possible. A very striking characterization that, in my opinion, touches to the core of this development can again be found in Giorgio Vasari's introduction to the third part of his lives of the most excellent painters, sculptors, and architects. Contrasting the artists of this generation to the previous one in terms of their judgment in the particular area of enriching a work of art with ornament, costumes, jewelry, and other riches, he writes, although the artists of the second generation greatly improved on the areas mentioned above, their art was not as accomplished as to achieve total perfection. They were lacking a certain freedom within the rules, one that is not prescribed by the rules of art, but is imposed by them and can be united with them without causing confusion or disrupting the order. This requires ingenuity of invention in all parts of a work of art, and a certain beauty that is implemented into the tiniest detail, which presents all that is learned by the rule with that much more embellishment. A little later he remarks more practically, they were lacking in the abundance of beautiful costumes, the variety in the fantastical inventions, the nuance in colors, a universal grasp of buildings, and the depth and the variety in landscapes. Now, although Vasari may be right in contending that the artists he treats in his third book were in most cases able to strike a better balance between all these factors, the various elements he describes and the heightened attention to detail can be noted in many artists of the previous generation, and is in Italy particularly strong in those cities where courts and therefore court artists were residing. The Milan of the Sforza is an example, as we just saw, and another important example can be found at the court of the Gonzago in Mantua and the Este family in Ferrara. It is also at these courts that the concept of design as an art form, the ability to conceive of ingenious ideas regarding composition and giving shape to objects, really came to fruition. This is emphasized greatly by the turn towards the print medium, so to speak, immortalize the designs. This happens first in the context of the court of Mantua, in the circle of Andrea Mantegna, where, for example, this design for a fountain, attributed to Paduan artist, was turned into an engraving, of which I unfortunately do not have an image, but it is kept in the print collection of the Uffizi Museum in Florence. Another example, coming close to what later would grow into the subgenre of fête prints, are the prints showing Mantegna's designs for a frieze of the Triumphal Parade. Especially in the case of the copies made to which are added the Ionic pillars with candelabra decorations. The pillars might refer to the original designs by Mantegna, depicting the architecture surrounding the frescoes, or an illusionistic architecture he had in mind to have frame and separate his scenes. Whatever may have been the case, it seems most logical that the printmaker who decided to include them had a similar idea in mind. A collector could cut out the paper pilasters and use them to attach the different scenes together, very much in the same way as Pieter Kucke van Aalst would do about 30 years later in designing his series of Habits and Morals of the Turks, which were published posthumously by his wife in 1553. That Mantegna's pillars were of interest in their own right is proven, however, by Giovanni Andrea da Brescia, who copied them individually in engravings pairing two to a plate. You see one here on the right side. How closely connected this early production of ornament prints was comes to the fore when we consider that Giovanni Andrea da Brescia was also responsible for the second most important set of ornaments produced in Milan. The group of 12 candelabra grotesques by or after Giovanni Pietro da Birago, a master long time known as the so-called master of the Sforza Book of Hours. Next to Leonardo's knotwork designs, these prints are without a doubt some of the most elaborate ornament prints produced up to this time, and through their rich imaginative compositions, which are each almost a foot high, evoke the question if we're here perhaps really dealing with ornament for ornament's sake. In other words, autonomous design, spread through prints for the principal reason of being admired and collected for their inherent qualities. It is in fact the grotesque ornament itself which would come to play an important role in the subsequent history of the ornament print. Grotesques were the first type of ornament to be the subject of a large-scale reproduction and design in the print medium. Following a similar development to their monumental counterparts in fresco wall decorations, the first experiments in grotesque design followed the shape of the candelabra, and were mainly used in the frames and so-called pinaches surrounding narrative scenes. Slowly but surely, however, the rigid vertical orientation of the candelabra was abandoned, making way for a freer treatment of ornament as pattern or surface ornament. After the discovery of the Grotesque in Nero's Golden House in Rome, the trend surfaced to mimic the style of the antiques, perhaps illustrated best by some of the palace decorations done by Raphael's workshop in Rome during the second decennium of the 16th century. Principal printmakers who created prints and print series communicating the possibilities of this new genre were, amongst others, Nicoletto da Modena, Agostino Veneziano, and Enea Vico. A taste of the excitement felt about the discovery of these ornaments from the ancient world and the importance given to the spread of these marvels through prints can be found in a series of engravings after Perino da Braga by the master of the die. They were published most likely for the first time around 1532 and later once again by Antonio Salamanca. Other than the Milanese prints I have discussed today, very few ornament prints published before this date were conceived of as series, and the addition of title pages would not become customary outside the book trade for another 2 decennia or so. This series represents somewhat of an exception, however, since one of the prints bears an inscription, a poem, distinguishing it from the others in this series, and though it's never been picked up in catalogs before, I would argue that this distinguishes the print as fulfilling the role of a title page. I have transcribed the text for you on this slide, and it reads something along the lines of the following. The poet and painter go as a pair, and it pulls their courage all to one goal. As it appears expressed in these sheets of paper, of ornamented artworks and praiseworthy artifice. Of this, Rome can give examples. Rome, host to all bright ingenuity. From its grottos where one never knows day, now so much light returns to such beautiful art. Poet and painter come together in these works of which Rome boasts so many beautiful examples. The artist and printmaker can do no other than bring light to those inventions which have been obscured through time and burial. What better way to do this than employ that wonderful new medium called print? The success of these Italian endeavors is unequivocal, as the prints quickly traveled north, where they were admired, copied, and emulated by artists of various renown. The workshop of the Hopfer family in Augsburg was instrumental in this development. Out of the approximately 50 ornament prints produced by patriarch Daniel Hopfer, the larger part shows grotesque designs, some copied directly after Italian examples, and others simply inspired by these new, exciting designs. Rather than considering these artists as deliberate art pirates and their works as derivative, to my mind, this phenomenon recalls the previous case of Albrecht Dürer, deciding to publish Leonardo's intricate knot designs. I think many of the early ornament printmakers realized the importance of their role as intermediary in forwarding those examples of design they deemed worthy of the attention of others. That is not to say that they were not looking to make a profit in the process, but the notion that these ornament prints were somehow considered communal goods or commodities comes to the fore once again. To what great result this perception of ornament can lead, I would like to illustrate through one final case study, for which we skip ahead a few years in time and follow in the footsteps of Leonardo da Vinci to the court of the French king, Francis I. When he was released from captivity by Emperor Charles V, who had held him in custody ever since he lost the Battle of Pavia in 1525, Francis decided to change his political program and focus more on internal affairs rather than the expansion of his kingdom. The prospect of spending more time in and around the capital forced him to reconsider his living situations, and he found that but few of the extant palaces were fit for prolonged residency and could accommodate a royal court. As such, he instigated an intensive building campaign, setting in motion the extensive renovations of the Louvre and simultaneously looking for other domicile. He turned his attentions to the hunting castle of Fontainebleau, approximately 60 kilometers south of the city of Paris. One of the first transformations to the castle was the addition of an aerial bridge, which connected the medieval castle to the Church of the Holy Trinity. So compared to the image that we just saw, the current situation around that time, this is 1530, this was the full extent of the palace, and this is the aerial bridge that he had built. The French master mason Jules Le Breton was hired in 1528 to execute the project, which was finished by 1530. Subsequently, Francis employed the Florentine artist Rosso Fiorentino and his Bolognese colleague Francesco Primaticcio to create the innovative, sumptuous decors the castle is still known for today. Once described as a jewelry box turned inside out, the scheme was conceived of as an integral program consisting of fresco decorations combined with striking stucco frames and matching wooden floor, ceiling, and wall paneling by the Italian artist Francesco Schiebeck de Carpi. The interaction is strongest between the fresco and stucco decorations of the frames, which are filled with a large quantity of playful ornaments and figures. There are still many interesting aspects to this decoration scheme that deserve further attention. But what I would like to focus on in this context is the fact that here we find the first monumental application of the ornament known in English as strapwork. You won't find these illustrations anywhere else. They're all by my hand. But they're isolated images of the strapwork of Fontainebleau. While the English term is used for a wide array of ornaments containing straps, the ornament I would like to focus on here is limited to what in Dutch and German is referred to as rolwerk. Like the term ornament print, this name was devised in the 19th century to be able to refer to this ornament that was omnipresent in decorations to the second half of the 16th century, or for which we do not have a satisfactory contemporary denominator. It was Alfred Lichtwark who, in his 1888 book Der Ornamentstich der deutschen Frührenaissance, introduced the name, which he derived from the second architectural series by Hans Vredeman de Vries, Das Anderbuch, where strapwork is characterized as das Versterben und Verlieren unten und oben am Werk mit Geruhl. It's sort of hard to translate in English, but it describes the motion of the ornament and how it rolls over, basically. And Lichtwark merges these words together to form the term rollwerk. Now, strapwork is of particular interest here because it appears to be the first ornament used during the Renaissance that looks completely new, having no direct ancestors in the arts of classical antiquity or the Middle Ages. Fontainebleau was the first place where it was used on a large scale to tie in together the different elements of the decoration scheme. It is a rather curious and difficult ornament to study because it is used in many different ways and in many different guises. Based on my own study of the strapwork of Fontainebleau, I came to the following definition, or rather description, of the ornament. Strapwork can be considered an autonomous ornament which has no direct model in the natural world. The material the ornament is rendered in cannot be defined unequivocally and is more artificial than organic in character. The ornament is defined by an interplay of tectonic strips or straps, although early examples, such as in the gallery of Francis I, are more dense and resemble a rectangular worked open tablet rather than a strap. The ends of the straps are bent in or outward and often encircle or penetrate another element of the decoration. Although the ornament is bent, it appears as though solidified and as such is no longer pliable. Compositions containing strapwork are characterized by a field of tension between a very dynamic arrangement of an essentially static ornament. In the gallery of Francis I, the interaction between the strapwork and the other elements can be seen in the way the loose strapwork elements hook onto other parts, and in some instances the strapwork even penetrates the painted surface of the frescoes. The fact that the stucco decorations were originally partly gilded and possibly also colored would have heightened this impression. It is the strong contrast between the white stucco ornaments and the painted surface that we see in Fontainebleau today, the result of many heavy restorations to the decor that happened as early as the late 16th century, that allows us to easily separate between one and the other. Originally, the interrelations would have come across more strongly. In the case of the real-life experience, the polychrome rendering would have thus heightened the unity of the whole. But the same effect is achieved also by taking away all color in a monochrome rendering of the whole. In the case of a print, for instance, the distinction between frame and framed is lost, and together they become one decorative scheme. After the work on the gallery was finished in about 1540, the innovative system of the Galerie de France-en-Premier was reproduced in etchings by a group of artists working at the castle itself. It is still unclear what exactly sparked this rather sudden turn towards the print medium. Was it planned all along, but postponed until the final completion of the project? Was it a reaction to the early death of the supposed inventor Rosso Fiorentino in 1540? Or was it incited by the arrival of an artist with previous experience in this medium? One or all of these causes may have played their part in the instigation of the period of approximately 6 years between 1542 and 1548, in which a relatively constant production of etchings took place at Fontainebleau. This was complemented soon after by engravings produced by the Parisian engravers Pierre Milan and René Boivin. One of the interesting aspects of the prints closest to the decorations of the gallery is that in most cases the frames and the scenes in their central compartments were separated. The frescoes were presented as autonomous inventions, and the frames in turn were either given a new content, which it could be argued took less attention away from the design of the frames, or were also presented by themselves. To my knowledge, this is the first instance in the history of ornament prints where frames are given this kind of autonomy. The separation is something explained by the fact that the prints were based on preparatory drawings, which separated one from the other because they were used at different times and by different craftsmen. In my opinion, this makes little sense, however, because if both models were still available for reproduction in the 1540s, it would not have been difficult for the engraver or preparatory draftsman to put the two back together. I think the etchers realized the viability of both concepts on their own, and subsequently purposely strove for variety, which is one of the main characteristics of series of ornament prints from the 16th century onwards. The printmakers fully exploited the scheme of the gallery, which proved to be a big success. The characteristic ornaments quickly reared their head in other production centers such as Lyon, Antwerp, and Nuremberg. It could be argued that the empty frames were only circulated to then be filled with something else. But if you look at the relation between the frame and compartment in some of the more progressive designs, I think we must conclude that whatever was to be framed cannot have been of all that much importance. This mise en abîme-like print by Jacques-André de Circeau, presenting a frame inside a frame, can be considered the prime example of my belief that by the 1540s, ornament prints could function as an autonomous kind of art piece, not necessarily meant to relate to executed projects or function as models for something outside its own medium. This development was enhanced by the freedom offered by the paper medium. On the one hand, the relatively low cost of designs on paper meant that an artist could express him or herself through the medium at any given moment, and was not dependent on the financial backing of a patron or expensive materials that should not be wasted on a fleeting moment of whimsical inspiration. At the same time, on the two-dimensional picture plane, a skillful artist is completely unconstrained by the limitations of reality, as is perhaps illustrated best in the illusionistic designs by an artist like M.C. Escher. This last aspect was very important for the further development of the strapwork ornament. At Fontainebleau, the first prints with strapwork stayed close to the vocabulary of the gallery and showed simple, loose strapwork elements, as I have shown them to you before. This kind of strapwork worked very well for Léonard Thierry, for example, who kept on working with the same basic system for quite some time. At the same time, however, in other prints, the quantity of strapwork elements slowly grew. The loose elements were forged together more and more, and their rendering became more sophisticated to form complex three-dimensional structures. By the 1550s, strapwork had become an established ornament which was applied and developed further outside Fontainebleau, where it received various and sometimes surprising treatments. One of the deciding factors in its success no doubt lay in the fact that it offered a new and attractive system to structure a composition, and thus combine and bring together various ornaments in a decorative scheme. A key realization in this process is the fact that the final stage in the development of the loose strapwork ornament used in the Galerie de France-en-Premier into such a system was neither a national nor a personal affair attributable to one specific artist. It did not happen per se in Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, or France, but on paper, in print, where the designer could explore the possibilities of the new ornament freely. So in the case of the strapwork prints, perhaps for the first time in history, did not only play a vital role in the spread of a new ornament, but also in its actual development. In conclusion, writing a comprehensive history of a genre as heterogeneous as the ornament print, even if one only focuses on a relatively short period in time, is not an easy task. Especially in its early history, there are so many unique cases to take into account that it sometimes becomes difficult to see the forest through the multitude of trees. Today I've traced some of that history by focusing on specific types of ornament and how their appearance influenced the establishment of the genre. On a higher level, the cases of Leonardo's knots, the introduction and spread of grotesque designs, and the development of strapwork attest to some of the most crucial aspects that contribute to the establishment of the genre. Principally, the way they embody a certain approach to ornament as a commodity, as a form of social or communal heritage that cannot be claimed by the individual artist. The hunger for ingenuity and invention that is appeased by the fact that new designs are spread almost as soon as they surface, helped along further by local copies or interpretations by other printmakers. And lastly, their reach and appeal to artists of all disciplines and various layers of society. There are many more ways to approach the subject in a fruitful manner, however, focusing on the various professionals involved in their production, ranging from a wide array of designers of different artistic backgrounds to professional engravers and publishers. This and other approaches I hope to explore in the upcoming years as I work my way towards the book, which I have provisionally entitled Autonomous Design: The Emergence of the Ornament Print in the Renaissance Print Market. Thank you.